Steve Gardner does a great job covering baseball for USA Today. Kind enough to join us for a couple moments. What's going on, pal?
Hey, Rich. How are you?
Good. We'll break up the Bradford talk, and we'll get into a good story in Philadelphia. How about the resurgence of the Philadelphia Phillies? And, you know, you look at this team, if the offense goes south like it's done a couple games, they're still relying on this pitching. But how about this pleasant surprise by the Phillies to start the season?
It's really nice, and at least for me, and I'm sure a lot of others, really unexpected. But what we've seen from the Phillies is a lot of grit, a lot of heart, and things that you really like to see when you have a team that's trying to rebuild and kind of start over. And some of the young players that have been part of this have been, it's great to see that.
Yeah.
And although you look at the stats and everything underlying, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Sure.
But to be over 500 at this point in the season in a division with a couple of heavyweights says a whole lot about Philly.
Listen, you got the right manager for the time being for the job, and you got young pitching, and Ryan Howard's starting to turn back the clock. You start to wonder, hey, the infusion of youth is maybe helping him kind of revert back to some of his glory years with the Phillies. And look, early on, I mean, you turn around, the Phillies are 16-13, and then conversely, the Yankees are 9-17. I mean, it's. And you called it. I thought the Yankees were going to be much better this year. It's pretty clear that Father Time has caught up with this team. They're relying way too much on Alex Rodriguez. The pitching hasn't been there. The offense has gone south. What's going on with the Yankees?
Well, I think it's just the offense is terrible, and I think it's because they're one-dimensional. And we see for a long time, one of the great assets the Yankees have had is hitting in Yankee Stadium. And you get a bunch of pull hitters who can take advantage of the short porch in right field and hit a bunch of home runs, and that's how the Yankees, built one of the better offenses in the league year in, year out, is those home runs. Well, now what you've got is a lot of guys who can be shifted on very easily, and a lot of those base hits that would go through in previous years are getting eaten up by infielders.
Yep.
And then you get those home runs. They're not three-run homers anymore. They're solo shots. And when you get the bats getting older, you're not seeing as many home runs from Mark Teixeira and Carlos Beltran and all of those guys. And it's really taken its toll.
And they'll start a series against the Boston Red Sox. And speaking of which, you look at David Ortiz, and he's just been on a tear. Homered again the other night in an 8-0 victory. I think he's 5 for 11 through that series, 9 of 19 with 5 ribbies over his 6-game hitting streak against New York. So, he's a guy that loves playing against the Yankees. Boston's playing very good baseball. Look, I give you credit. You called the Nationals before the season started. They're playing really well, but I'm more interested in another team. Did you expect the Chicago Cubs to have this start to their season?
I can't say that I expected, a record win pace or anything like that. But when you looked at their team, even in spring training, there was really no hole in the entire lineup, in the bench. They had one of the deeper benches, and I think one of the testaments to the way that the Cubs have been constructed is they could lose a guy who every team in Major League Baseball would love to have in Kyle Schwarber. They could lose him for the season and really not miss a beat. They can move Chris Bryant out to the outfield. They can shift guys around. Javier Baez can be that utility guy that Ben Zobrist was for former Joe Madden teams in Tampa Bay. This is just a club that has pretty much no weakness, as far as I can see. And right now they're playing that way because they're just beating up on everybody.
How about the start for Robbie Cano? Another 4 ribbies against the Astros Thursday. Gave him 30 for the season in 28 games. I think he's the second fastest player in Mariners history to reach that mark. Ken Griffey Jr. had 30 ribbies in 23 games back in 97, but kind of a nice back bounce season or start to the season for Robbie Cano.
Yeah, that was the thing at the beginning of last year. He was dealing with like an acid reflux situation that really, it sounds not that big of a deal, but it was affecting his play. And he had a horrible first half of the season and barely got over it over the second half and started to hit much better. He's continued that now. And the Mariners, I think one of the great things about their start is they've kind of transformed with the new Jerry Dipoto as GM. They've kind of transformed from a slugging, all-or-nothing kind of team to a team that will get on base, and you put guys on in front of Robbie Cano, you can't pitch around him, and he's just thriving right now and making great contact and having great results.
Couple minutes on a Friday with Steve Gardner. Does a great job covering MLB for USA Today. Rich Quinones here. We'll take you up to 2. I want to get into a couple more quickies for you. This whole Tim Lincecum, we forget he's still, 30, 31 years of age. And I know he's thrown off the mound trying to get some teams to maybe take a flyer on him. And it's weird because you just look at that contract, right? He wrapped up $35 million, 2-year contract, paid him $18 million last year, spent the offseason rehabbing in Arizona rather than in his regular Seattle area routine. So his father came out and said he's ready to pitch. He will pitch this year, but he's going to be a different pitcher. A, do you think he's going to pitch this year? And if he gets signed and he does pitch, what could we expect?
I think right now, at this stage of his career, Tim Lincecum is a guy who can maybe be a 2-inning bullpen guy. I just don't see him being a major league starter anymore. I mean, as his career with the Giants progressed, he went from a power pitcher who struck out, huge numbers of hitters to a guy that had to use finesse. And when his mechanics were a little bit off, that's when he'd leave the ball up, and people would just make him pay for it. And I think at this point in the season, and this point in his career, I just don't think he can go back to that kind of pitching style that he had all of his success and won the Cy Youngs with. So, yeah, I think Lincecum certainly has, is not out of baseball, I don't think. I think there's room for him, but on a pitching staff, unless you're one that's ravaged by injuries in the starting rotation, like maybe the Angels are at this point, I don't think he can be an effective major league starter, but I think he can be an effective major league reliever. And remember back when I think it was one of the playoffs where the Giants had him as that super reliever kind of guy. I think that's the pitcher that he can be now and be most effective. Yeah, and you mentioned the Angels losing one of their aces in Garrett Richards to a torn ligament in his pitching elbow. He's going to get TJ Tommy John surgery. Last one for you. This whole PED situation, 7, 8 players. Now there's going to be more players that come about. I know you can't speak to this. It's a goofy question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Would you be content as a player with the amount of games that players are missing or would be suspended regarding PEDs? In other words, do you think there should be harsher penalties too for first-time offenders? That's a good question. I think if I were playing and I knew that I was clean and there are still other people that are using and trying to get an advantage on me, I think I would be upset. And I think I would feel like that maybe because it's only half a season for a first offense that maybe the penalties need to be harsher. I think in reality, what we're seeing is only a few people getting caught. And, which means if 99% of the guys that are going through the program are not testing positive, then it's doing a pretty good job and it's pretty effective. The one thing, though, I think is that we're seeing the positive tests now are a result of the tests being a little bit more effective, being able to detect things a little bit longer that have been in people's systems. Yeah. And I think that for the game is a positive thing because, you hear all the time that the cheaters are far ahead of the testers. I think we're getting a little bit closer now to the testers catching up with that. And that's why we're seeing these suspensions of, players like D. Gordon and Chris Colabello, who you really, don't associate with the typical steroid users. No, it's certainly something that bears worth watching. We've argued, well, I wouldn't say argue, but you and I have gone back with this players union, strongest in all of sports with baseball. So you kind of walk that fine line. Hey, great stuff as always, my friend. I appreciate it. Great insight. We'll talk next week. Thanks for a couple moments, Steve. Thanks, Rich. Always a pleasure. Have a good weekend. All right, you too, pal. Steve Gardner. Great follow on Twitter, by the way, at Steve A. Gardner, Gardner. Does baseball, fantasy editor, too, for USA Sports as well.